records of millions of Americans collected by the U.S. government.
I'd like to know how the president feels that my cell phone calls and your cell phone calls are relevant to an investigation.
A separate program checking internet records of foreigners. And federal officials reluctant to acknowledge the programs even exist.
Does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
This week on Straight Talk, a deeper dive into electronic surveillance and monitoring, and the balancing of your rights with the nation's safety. Our guests include Ken Westin, a security researcher with Portland-based Tripwire, and national security law expert Tung, a professor at Lewis & Clark Law School. From News Channel 8, this is Straight Talk with Laurel Porter.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight for Straight Talk. I'm Laurel Porter. When a National Security Agency contractor, Edward Snowden, revealed top secret details on the government's collection of millions of Americans' phone and internet records, it triggered a vigorous debate. Are the NSA programs spying on Americans or protecting them? How much information does the government really have on you? And other whistleblowers say this isn't new. They say the government's been conducting secret surveillance on Americans for years. Joining us now to give us their insights, please welcome my guest. Ken Westin is a security researcher in Portland. He's developed and utilized in the past advanced technology to help track stolen laptops, cell phones, and other devices. His work has been featured in publications such as Forbes and Wired, and he's appeared on NBC Dateline. And from Lewis & Clark College, law professor Tung. His scholarly work has focused primarily on domestic legal issues arising out of the U.S. military and prosecutorial responses to the 9/11 attacks. He's researched and written extensively on national security issues. And also joining us tonight, an attorney for the American Civil Liberties Union, Stephen Wilker. He's the chair of the Lawyers Committee for the ACLU, and he's on the Oregon ACLU's Board of Directors as the Vice President of Litigation. Steve Wilker has worked on a wide array of First Amendment issues. Welcome, everybody, to Straight Talk. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
Let me start off with, what was your reaction? Were you surprised when you heard the revelation about this massive secret surveillance program the government's conducting? Let me start with Ken.
Well, I think some of the basics of what we heard, at least. I don't think anybody in the security space has been particularly surprised. The technology's out there. In terms of what depth the government's actually doing anything, and I think that's still up in the air. But the fact that the technology exists, there's this capability out there, and we've seen a lot of cases where it has been used. But again, I don't think we know for sure exactly what the program's being used, what technology is being used, and I think we'll learn more probably over the coming months.
Professor Tung.
No, I don't think it was surprising because basically everything that this administration has done in the counterterrorism arena has been very similar, if not an expansion upon what was happening the second term of the President Bush administration. And so, of course, we saw during the Bush administration there was an earlier version of this program called Stellar Wind that was going on. And so in that sense, no, it's not surprising.
And Stephen Wilker.
I guess surprise would be the wrong word. I think there's some surprise at the scope of the program and the scope of the data collection and storage that's going on. It's really, truly massive.
What about the fact that this sort of low-level guy, Edward Snowden, working for a private contractor, could get access to this kind of top-secret information? Stephen.
Well, I think what's interesting is that he had access to the orders of the court, of the Fisa Court, that allowed him the opportunity to disclose these facts. I mean, it's somewhat surprising that someone at that level would have access to something that would be considered this secret, given the protections that apply to Fisa Court orders.
And how would he do it, Ken? How would he download that much information?
I wouldn't say that he probably wasn't authorized to have access to those types of records, but as a system administrator, he may know about vulnerabilities that are within the network on certain services. If an upgrade wasn't taking place, for example, and he may be able to take advantage of that to go in there. Particularly network administrators, they have access to a lot of information in companies and in the government. You'd be surprised how many files and servers they have access to. And usually there's a code of ethics that they follow that they're not going to be doing things like stealing data or other things like that. So of course that raises a lot of questions, particularly in this case.
And you've talked about how this is metadata. Can you tell us what that is?
Well, at least with the Verizon records, from what we know, it's metadata. I kind of compare it to a package or mail. You can see, who it's going to, who it's from, the postmark date of when it happened, but not necessarily what's inside. In a lot of when I work with law enforcement, a lot of investigations, they have to go through a lot of legal proceedings to make sure that, to get access to IP information or other data, they have to show probable cause, and sometimes it's a pain to go through, but it's something that's always they have to do.
So a lot of Americans are wondering, is the government listening in to our conversations, reading our email? And let's listen to what the president said, even on the world stage this last week when he was at the G8 summit over in Great Britain. He was dogged by these embarrassing leaks. So he had to kind of explain to everybody there that without a court order and probable cause of a terror plot, that the government is not listening in. And during an interview with Charlie Rose on PBS, this is what he said.
If you are a U.S. person, the NSA cannot listen to your telephone calls, and the NSA cannot target your emails.
And have not.
And have not. What I've asked the intelligence community to do is see how much of this we can declassify without further compromising the program.
And also this week, we also heard again from Edward Snowden, the leaker, and he talked with The Guardian again. And this is a quote from him that came from Monday in a web chat. And he said, quote, "If I target, for example, an email address, and that email address sends something to you, Joe America, the analyst gets it, all of it." So let me ask Steve, what amendments are we talking about that are potentially violated here that you're concerned about with the ACLU?
Well, we're concerned, frankly, about the Fourth Amendment impact of searches of people's email accounts, telephone accounts without probable cause. Just a few years ago in U.S. v. Jones, the Supreme Court held you couldn't even track location by a tracking device without a search warrant. In this case, we've got a secret court issuing secret orders that aren't exposed to any any public scrutiny, and the government is using those in order to obtain access to information. It's a very dangerous prospect.
Tung, do you want to weigh in on that?
Well, I think that's basically right. The Fourth Amendment is the key issue, although FISA is a complicated statute, and there's some gray areas in here that the government is...
Let's talk about first, what is FISA?
FISA is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978, and what it did is it created the Fisa Court that Steve mentioned. Before that, this kind of foreign intelligence gathering was the Wild West, and the president had all sorts of essentially power to do whatever he wanted. And Congress stepped in 1978 following the Watergate crisis and said, no, we think that there should be some sort of court in place, some sort of warrant requirement. And so FISA actually represents a bit of a pushback against the executive. The problem is that FISA, it does operate in secret, as Steve mentioned. It's ex parte, which means only the government is there to seek the warrant. That's not unusual, because when the police ask for a search warrant, they don't give notice to the target ahead of time. The difference is that a regular police search warrant, when the police show up to search your house or your office or whatever, they hand you the warrant and say, look at it, and they're rummaging through your stuff, but you have the search warrant. You could look at it. You could call your lawyer and say, hey, take a look at this. And you can challenge the warrant after the fact. And if you win, then the fruits of the search are thrown out. With FISA, the government, if it gets a warrant, it conducts the search. But you may never know that the search has happened, because the search might not ever be, the fruits might not ever be used to prosecute you, but the government may still be spying on you in this sense. So,
there are 11 federal judges appointed by the Supreme Court justice who preside over this court, right?
Yes.
And critics say they have this rubber stamp for the surveillance of the government to do that.
Well, there was one study that found that before 9/11, that there were approximately 10,000 requests during the relevant time period, and 9,995 of them were approved completely as is, and 5 of them were approved with amendments. And the government appealed. There's another layer of the FISA court. The government appealed, and 4 of those 5 amendments were reversed, and the government got the FISA order the way that it originally requested it. So That's some evidence that suggests that it's rubber stamping. Others have said that maybe the government is very careful and only submits very tight FISA applications. Without seeing the applications, we have no way of knowing which interpretation is correct.
And Stephen, the ACLU is suing over this. Tell us about that.
Well, the ACLU is a customer of Verizon, and so when the Snowden leak occurred, and it was Verizon records, ACLU had standing to challenge the seizure of its records of its phone calls. And it's filed a suit last week in federal court. It also filed a motion with the Fisa Court to unseal the records and to seek a public disclosure of the program. The problem with the secrecy is we don't know. There's so much of this is happening behind closed doors that we don't even know what our government's doing. We can't answer with confidence whether they're doing what we think they might be doing, whether President Obama is accurate in what they can and can't access, because we haven't had that discussion. The president said he welcomes an open debate, but we need information to have a debate. Right now we have a very secret process in which, frankly, all three branches of our government have, in the ACLU's view, abdicated their responsibility to the Constitution and to the American people.
Both of Oregon senators are very concerned about this. I want to play some sound from both Senator Merkley and Senator Wyden. We'll start with what Senator Jeff Merkley had to say about these secret surveillance programs.
I'd like to know how the president feels that my cell phone calls and your cell phone calls are relevant to an investigation. What investigation? What act or what threat?
And then Senator Wyden, he knew about the widespread phone and internet data collection because he's a member of a Senate Intelligence Committee, but he could only hint about it in public. But he did question the Director of National Intelligence, General Clapper, in March. And then when all of this was revealed, Senator Wyden tweeted this: in March, DNI Clapper specifically told me NSA does not wittingly collect any type of data on millions of Americans. Let's listen to that interchange between Senator Wyden and General Clapper.
Does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly. There are cases where they could inadvertently, perhaps, collect, but not wittingly.
And before I get your reaction to what this might mean, I want to have Ken weigh in on another program we haven't mentioned yet, this PRISM program, where the government has had access to some of the major online providers' data, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I think a lot of it, you say, a lot of the media has said that they had direct access and they can go in and access everything, and I don't think that's true. I think a lot of it is, we have a 41-page PowerPoint presentation that we're basing a lot of this on, and they say collection. I know that a lot of times, some providers, they will put information in a secure server via FTP, and then law enforcement can go in and they can collect it that way, but not necessarily provide wholesale access to law enforcement to go in and look at all that data. So I think it's the media is saying one thing, the government's saying one thing, and I think the truth is somewhere in the middle.
And Google is going to the Fisa Court over this, and they're talking about a different amendment, the First Amendment. They're saying that it violates their right of free speech, that they can't talk about. They have a gag order on them as well as all the other internet providers. Do you want to weigh in on that, Stephen, at all?
Well, I think that's one of the interesting pieces, and Tung alluded to it earlier. When there's a search executed pursuant to a Fisa Court order, not only can't there's a gag order. You can't tell if you've received the order to produce records. If you're Google, you can't even tell your customers that you've gotten it. It used to be that you couldn't even tell your lawyer. Congress changed that and allowed recipients of these requests and orders to talk to their lawyers so that they could determine what their obligations were. But it's a stark infringement of First Amendment rights in a couple of different respects. One, it impacts what individuals can say, but it also impacts what people are willing to say and whether they have a fear or chilling of their First Amendment freedoms when they're using their phones or their internet devices.
Which worries Google because they make their business off people sharing their personal information so they can target ads. So if the public is worried about how that information is being used, they may not be willing to share that information with these companies and Google. Google says this has hurt their business.
And I don't know whether it's hurt their business or not, but I would think that people might be more circumspect at how they use their communication devices, given the possibility that the NSA is listening or watching.
I want to go back to General Clapper and Tung, how much wiggle room does he have in what he said to Congress? Because you can't lie to Congress. Did that sound like a lie to you?
That did not sound very good. I mean, he could try a sort of Clintonian argument that it depends on what the meaning of the word unwittingly is, but I don't think unwittingly is subject to that kind of nuance, that you could argue that, I mean, unwittingly suggests that, well, it just happened by accident or by happenstance, and that doesn't seem to describe the program in place. I think that maybe the more likely argument will be some sort of executive privilege, that we had to lie about this, if they even conceded to lie, or we had to dissemble about it because national security was at stake, and I was caught by surprise by this question.
Did you want to weigh in on that?
I just think it's all part of the national security exception to the Constitution that the last two administrations have seemed to try to ingrain in government activity these days, so that you can lie or refuse to tell the truth if it's an aid of national security, and that it excuses the act. And we'll see what happens with that.
And Ken, we need to go to a break, but did you have something you wanted to add to the Google part? I sensed that you wanted to say something.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it just opens up a broader conversation. I think the silver lining of this is actually that consumers are now more aware of security and privacy. I think sometimes they're a little naive about how our data is shared. You can get more information actually just from the information that we put out there, from photos we post, than probably the NSA could ever get. So I think the fact that we've put this information out there, I think we should accept some of that responsibility as well.
Because we're sharing a lot of personal information freely.
Very much so.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. We'll take a break right now. We'll continue our discussion on the government's secret surveillance programs and what it means to you. And we'll hear from our commentators on immigration reform. Lars and David answer this question: which is the right way to handle immigration? Cracking down on those living here illegally, or offering the hope of citizenship? We're back in 2 minutes.
For over 100 years, NECA and IBEW48 electricians have led the way in Northwest development. What powered the past will make way for the future. A unique partnership built on innovation, delivering the newest, greenest contributions to Oregon and Southwest Washington communities today. For a century, NECA and IBEW48 have provided safe, affordable, innovative results. Let the experience of the past power your electrifying projects in the future. NECA IBEW48, building for a greener tomorrow.
Our world can be your world. Azumano Travel.
$25,000 going once, twice, sold. This beautiful early 19th century table to bidder number 7.
You can buy a piece of history.
The next item up for bid is the future of these aspiring students.
You can also help shape it.
I'd like to start the bidding off at $25,000.
The Oregon Community Foundation can put your resources to work for the causes you care most about. Learn more at OregonCF.org.
Sold.
I think the Northwest is so unique. People here care. They're engaged. Public meetings are packed and people protest in the streets.
What democracy looks like!
Remarkable people that are truly making a difference.
I'm here to help people.
Telling their stories is so fun. I want to feel a connection, and I hope others do too.
Welcome back to Straight Talk. I'm Laurel Porter. We're talking about the government's secret surveillance programs, what it means to you, and what happens next. Welcome once again to my guests. Thanks again for being here. There's an interesting magazine out, Time magazine, that's out this Monday called The Informers. And I want to read you a quote from it, and then I'll get your reaction. And it's called, it's talking about The Geeks Who Leak is the title of the article. And here's a quote from that. The U.S. national security infrastructure was built to protect the nation against foreign enemies and the spies they recruit. 20-something homegrown computer geeks like Snowden with utopian ideas of how the world should work scramble those assumptions. Just as anti-war protesters of the Vietnam era argued that peace, not war, was the natural state of man, this new breed of radical technophiles believes that transparency and personal privacy are the foundations of a free society. Secrecy and surveillance, therefore, are gateways to tyranny. So let me ask Ken, do you think we're going to see, some people think this is like a new era, we're going to see more of these informants?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that, I mean, particularly in corporate America and the enterprise, is something we've been dealing with already, the insider threat. It used to be that an employee would maybe steal data off of a network and sell to a competitor. You know, a lot of times actually deploying malware is the easiest thing to do as an insider. Install it on a flash drive and plug it into a computer. Stuxnet's a good example of that. So it's really nothing new. I think the shift is a little bit different. Now it's more about idealism and, you know, people wanting to put their own, you know, whatever it is out there, their own agenda. But it's a serious issue too, is that, you know, it's one thing for people to be doing that, but it can also have implications on the corporate side. It can cost people money. It can cost people's lives. I mean, when it comes to military secrets and things like that. You know, there's good things that came out of this, and there's bad things too. So, you know, sort of a balance. So.
Americans are really divided whether he's a hero or a traitor. The government really doesn't know where he is. He's supposedly in Hong Kong, but they haven't been able to track him down. His father is asking him to stop leaking. He's saying there's going to be more information coming out. Tung, what do you think happens to Edward Snowden? What happens next? I mean, he's a private citizen, so that's a little different than being a government employee.
Well, I think one possibility is the government finds out where he is and extradites him, and whichever country agrees, and he comes back and he stands trial for, you know, there's a variety of charges, espionage, and there's mishandling of classified information. Another possibility is that he gets asylum at some country and he can't be extradited, and an offshoot of that, I suppose, is maybe he even defects to a foreign country, one of our frenemies, and starts handing out more information that he's at least hinted that he has. So I think who knows what will happen.
Stephen, what do you think is going to happen next as far as what the government's response is? Are we going to see congressional hearings on this? I would be surprised if we don't see some level of response from Congress, given the statements that have been made so far. I do think that it's not clear to me how Congress is ultimately going to react, because in these kinds of circumstances in the past, as Tung alluded to earlier, sometimes they've created new processes that don't necessarily solve the problem. So the Fisa Court itself, it was the Wild West before. Is it really that much different now? And so we don't really know, because so much of it is done in secret. So more to come on that. And let me just finally finish up with Ken. Can you just briefly, in about 30 seconds, tell us what can people do at home to protect their privacy?
Well, first of all, be aware of the information that you're sharing. You know, when you are putting information out there on Facebook and Twitter, just be aware, even though, you know, you're just sharing with your family, that information can be spread to a larger group. If you're trying to be really covert, there's tools you can use like Tor and CryptoCat. These are utilities that actually will encrypt your information end to end. So even if it's intercepted, there's really no way that someone can make sense of that. And also be aware of information you're sharing in the cloud. A lot of times people use offline backup. You know, that information is stored in a way that it's not encrypted, and someone could have access to that information. So I think that, and also start reading those privacy policies. You'd be amazed if you actually go through and read those. You'd be shaking your head and you really wonder, should I be actually using these services? And also pay attention to the security that actually these organizations have. A lot of times startups— I need to stop you there. I'm sorry, we've run out of time. There's a lot more we could talk about. Thank you so much for being here on Straight Talk. And now to our commentary this week. A bipartisan group of senators scrambled to reach a fresh compromise on immigration reform, one they hope will move it towards passage in the Senate and give it momentum heading into the Republican-controlled House, where it faces an even tougher battle. So we asked our commentators, Lars Larson and David Saracen, this question: which is the right way to handle immigration, cracking down on those living here illegally or offering hope of citizenship?
Straight talk from the left and from the right.
Call me crazy, but I think the right way to handle illegal aliens in America is to use the laws on the books. And let's get one thing straight. They're not immigrants. That's a term politicians and liberal reporters use to shame us for demanding adherence to the law. When you immigrate to a country, you join with a group of citizens who have their own laws, and you should follow them. The bill now going through the Senate, the Gang of Ocho plan from Marco Rubio and company, sells out Americans. It hurts wages of legal workers, burdens our social services and schools, and it rewards illegal aliens for years of law breaking. It'll guarantee a new wave of millions of illegals to fill the jobs that American business wants done on the cheap and ballot boxes for Democrat Party candidates. The best solution? Insist that American business only hire legal workers. The IRS could announce tomorrow that any business with illegal workers cannot deduct the wages of those workers at tax time. Make illegals unemployable and they'll self-deport, just like many did after the 2008 economic implosion. Wages of real Americans would rise. Classrooms would have more room. Demand for food stamps and welfare would drop, and we would be following the law. This is a nation of laws, and if you want to be an immigrant, do it legally.
Now, straight talk from the left.
There's a clear difference between trying to find a way to fit undocumented immigrants into American society and pounding your chest and pledging to crack down on them. One is possible, the other is posturing. Nobody actually believes that we're going to get a bus and send 11 million people back where they came from. Nobody really thinks we have the capacity to do it, and nobody really thinks that we're going to uproot millions of people, some of them here for decades, with homes, jobs, and children who are American citizens. We know we can't do it, and we know we're not that kind of people. So if we're not going to drive them out of the country, we need to bring them out of the shadows. The bill the Senate is debating isn't a casual amnesty. Undocumented immigrants will have to pay a fine and any back taxes, and it would be more than a decade before they get on a real path to citizenship. But it has this advantage. It recognizes that they live here and are going to live here, and that we shouldn't have second-class Americans. Posturing sometimes wins in politics. You just can't build a country on it.
Thank you once again to my guests, and thank you for watching. We'll see you next week for Straight Talk.
KGW is part of Belo Corp, listed on the New York Stock Exchange as BLC.
For over